Welcome to Dale's Dominion podcast, where we discuss Virginia real estate and beyond. Here's your host, Dale Shoop.
Welcome to Dale's Dominion, Virginia real estate and beyond, where we dive deep into the world of real estate and title insurance. And if we have time, we might talk about money and motivation, cars and coffee, or maybe burgers and bourbon. I'm your host, Dale Shoop, and today we're going to dig into the NAR settlement with our special guest, Karl Waizecker. He's the principal broker at Kline May Realty, leading company strategy and operations. Karl's also deeply committed to his family and community. With his wife, Ginny, by his side for 31 years, Karl's a proud father of 2 grown children. One of them even works with him in IT at Kline May. Karl's a foster parent, a big brother, and has served on the Boys and Girls Club, the Shenandoah Valley Bicycle Coalition, and McGahkeysville United Methodist Church for several years. Welcome, Karl, to the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation.
Glad to have you here. Also a JMU grad, yeah?
That is true. That is true.
So tell us a little bit about your journey from Nova to JMU to Kline May Realty.
Those were the jumping off points. I grew up in Northern Virginia, and I noticed on your LinkedIn we were fairly close. I'm a Chantilly High School guy.
Okay, Centerville.
Yeah. So JMU got me to Harrisonburg in '83. And I fell in love with the place. And after graduating, stayed here, worked in human resources for about 10 years. During that time, I met Keith May, who owns our company. And he was actually our first agent when Jenny and I bought our first house. And he and I hit it off. And he kept after me to quit my job and get into real estate, which I did in 1998. And
Wow.
Sold houses for 7 years and then got into management here and then became the broker.
Wow. So supporting realtors is a big part of what you do.
It is. It is. I kind of see myself as the coach.
Excellent. So with the recent NAR settlement kind of reshaping how commissions are handled in real estate transactions, what impacts do you see coming in July that's going to affect those agents here in the Valley?
Well, I think there are going to be some, but it's not going to be nearly as dramatic as what a lot of the headlines would lead folks to believe. I think there's been a lot of misleading information out there, misunderstandings. And one thing that's important to understand is this is a nationwide settlement, applies to all 50 states. The court case on which it was based was in Missouri. And largely based on their documents and how their clients had misunderstandings with their documents. And each state does things differently. So right now, only 17 states require buyer agency agreements. Fortunately, Virginia is one of them. But for those other 33 states, it's going to be a major transition to create those agreements and then wrap their heads around communicating that to their clients. So that's something we're not going to have to really deal with other than a timing issue. When Virginia mandated buyer agency agreements, the first step, the initial guidance that we got was that those agreements had to be signed before you open the door. And within a year and a half or so, the real estate board realized that was just not at all practical. And it wasn't practical for agents in terms of having multiple buyers, and it wasn't practical for consumers in terms of asking them to sign a contract with somebody they had just met. So they reinterpreted that, and the guidance now is whenever we have substantive conversations, then we need to stop and talk about who's representing whom. This NAR settlement brings us back to before we open the door, which is going to be a little bit of a hurdle for folks to get over. But certainly not as much as in those states who've never had this issue. On the issue of commissions, I'm not sure too much is going to change, mainly because where we are in terms of the fee most firms charge is at that spot because of market forces, not because anybody told us we had to be there or we had to charge a certain amount. In fact, NAR goes out of their way to prevent antitrust violations. Every committee meeting we have starts with an antitrust statement and a reminder that we can't talk about anything that might stray into those areas. So, I don't think there's a lot of room for change in terms of the business model. There's certainly going to be a lot of new business models proposed, but I think consumers have spoken pretty loudly that they want full service, and they're willing to pay for that.
Sure. So one of the terms I keep hearing is decoupling, decoupling the commission. Is that a shift in how realtors are getting paid?
It may be, but I think a lot of that has to do with the seller's understanding of the listing agreement and how the money flows. In Virginia, our listing agreement, I've always thought, is very clear, and I happen to be on the committee that creates those forms, and it says very simply, it's a contract between the seller and a brokerage, and the seller agrees to pay a fee of X, and the brokerage agrees to do these things in order to get the house sold. Then further down the contract, it says, hey, may we offer your house to other firms? If so, may we offer to share what we're earning with them? Not you're going to have to pay more, but we're willing to take less for the same result. And I think once sellers understand that, it doesn't seem like maybe the overcharging that some of these headlines would lead folks to believe. The other side of that is, in addition to the fact that the firm likely would charge the same amount whether another agent was involved or not, the other side of that is if they would agree to a fee that was low enough that they couldn't then offer to share with a buyer's agent, they might be eliminating some folks from the market, because I really don't believe this is going to cause any kind of price drop. That's one of the myths that's out there. Buyers are going to pay a market price, which means the most the market will bear. If sellers cut their commission costs, the sellers are going to do a little bit better maybe, but the buyers are still going to be paying the most the market will bear in this very competitive market. So I think by forcing that onto the buyer to pay out of pocket, they may eliminate some folks from the pool of buyers and thereby maybe eliminate some offers. And then in most cases, if they're in that situation, the buyer is going to ask for those fees to be paid anyway as a term of their contract. So the agreement doesn't say that the listing firm can't share, and the agreement doesn't say that the seller can't pay the buyer's agent. It just says that mainly that we can't advertise what we are willing to share. So the way it's always worked in the past, when an agent enters a listing into the multiple listing service, one of the fields that's mandatory is, if one of these other firms brings a buyer before I do, how much of my commission am I willing to share? And that field is going away. That's really going to be the main difference for us, is that now is going to be a conversation that happens as showings are being set up, which is exactly how it works in the commercial world.
So that buyer's agent has no idea what cut they might get,
right?
Until they have that conversation with the listing agent.
Right. And the theory behind that was that agents were steering their buyers to the listings that would bring them the most commission, which I just can't imagine is true now. It may have been true in the past, but right now the buyers know every single home that's for sale. There's no way an agent could steer them around a home that matched their criteria in order to get a higher price. It just, I don't think that happens right now. But that's the practice change that's going to hit us locally. Yeah.
Okay. And that idea that the 5 or 6% commission is baked into the listing price, and so the notion that pricing will go down if that commission goes down, that's probably not true at all, is it?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's true that it's baked into the listing price in that sellers will be thinking in terms of their net proceeds. In fact, that's usually one of the documents we give them is to sit down with them and work through what their net proceeds are going to be. But as I said earlier, right now it's super competitive, and the buyers are going to pay the most they can afford, regardless of what the seller's deal with the listing firm is. So I don't think prices would come down. And again, I think if the seller isn't offering enough for the listing firm to share, then the buyer's going to ask for it.
I see. So there may not be a case where buyers start to shoulder some of the that fee themselves.
I think there will be some, and there will also be some who choose to go without a buyer's agent and negotiate a lower price, and the seller negotiates a lower fee to their listing agent. But I think there are going to be some really bad consequences if that type of thing happens, especially in a state like Virginia. That's a buyer beware state. The seller doesn't have to disclose very much at all about their house, other than a half a dozen things. They don't need to say anything about a leaky roof or a flooded basement or cracked floor joists or anything like that. So if a buyer goes into a transaction without representation, especially a first-time buyer who would likely be the most affected or the most apt to try to go without an agent to save money, I'm afraid there would be some really bad consequences.
I'm sure there would. As from our perspective as settlement agents, we occasionally do deal with clients that are not represented by an agent, and it's always kind of scary. You know, they don't know all the things they need to be asking for.
Right.
And yeah. So that kind of blends into the work that the buyer's agent actually does, and that people probably don't recognize. I guess agents will need to start explaining their value and what they're bringing to the table.
That's exactly it. I mean, part of that, that buyer's agreement, even though I believe in the majority of cases, the listing firm will still be offering to share with the selling firm. That buyer agency agreement has a section on compensation, and it says, hey, we're agreeing you're going to pay me X. Whatever I get from the seller's firm will offset that. But bottom line is, this is our fee for buyer representation. And so in order for a buyer to be comfortable signing that, they need to be comfortable that they're getting that much value. And that's something we've done a poor job of, really, as an industry, and have kind of created this void where the consumer doesn't exactly know the difference between a good agent and a bad agent. One of our former agents, now retired, used to say, that they feel like it's picking a checkout line at Walmart. They're going to get the same experience regardless of whom they choose. And so I think it's going to be very important now for buyer agents to be able to sit down and say, yes, this is what my firm charges, but here's why you're better off with us than without us.
Okay. And is this one of the situations, I know as settlement agents, we kind of see it, that if we do a good job, if we do our job right, everything kind of goes pretty smooth, and the customer doesn't really experience or doesn't get to see the work we do or why it's valuable.
Right.
Would that be the same for a buyer's agent?
Exactly the same. Yeah. A great buyer's agent is staying a step ahead of any potential problems. Their experience, market knowledge allows them to do that. And to the buyer, hopefully it's a great, pleasant, stress-free experience. And the agent takes on all of those fires that need to be put out and the drama that comes up sometimes, and tries to protect the buyer from that whenever possible. So that's part of the irony of the why we need to do a better job explaining what it is that we do. And I think also explaining that a lot of what makes a good agent is institutional knowledge, market knowledge, lots and lots of research, being in and out of lots of situations. So much like any other kind of professional, you're not necessarily only paying for the month or two that you spend with this person. You're paying for
Right.
all the work they put into their career before that month or two. And that's really where the value is, I think.
Yeah, it's like the old story of the TV repairman that just turned one
Right.
screw, but the bill was $100.
Exactly.
It's like knowing which screw to turn was the real cost there. So as we look ahead, what sort of strategies or advice would you offer to buyers and sellers as they navigate sort of this new era of real estate transactions?
Well, I think first and foremost with buyers, there needs to be a bit of a change of mindset. Sellers typically, when they're ready to sell, they know that they need an agent. They know they need a sign in their yard. And so they start talking to people and getting recommendations and that type of thing, and maybe interviewing several. I think buyers need to start behaving the same way and starting their relationship with their agent with a sit-down business meeting like sellers do, and asking them, especially now, if the rule remains that we're required to get the agreement signed before we show them any homes at all. Let's behave like a seller and interview a few agents, see what they present to you, see what you're getting for your money, and then decide who's the best match for you. Most buyers tend to avoid agents while they're in their initial home search, and we're all searching online, and only when they're ready to go indoors do they actually reach out to an agent. And then it's usually, hey, can you meet me at the house? So I think that's going to be the big shift on the buyer side is we're going to have to coach them and educate them that the beginning of the relationship is going to change. And I think that's for the better. That's been a best practice forever. It's just kind of the urgency of the situation gets people to skip that step. And we usually take care of that after we've shown them the first couple houses. So that'll be a change. Right. On the seller side, it's really going to be the discussion of that listing agreement and who is paying whom and where the money flows, and making sure everything's transparent. They're very comfortable. They know that they can negotiate terms with regard to whether they're offering enough to pay the buyer's agent. And they know the consequences of doing that or not. And then we move forward. So I think the end result will be better discussions, more transparency, better understanding, an opportunity for folks to explain their value. All good things, but I think there'll be some heartache along the way as we all relearn those steps.
Maybe
but again, we're in so much better a position than those states who have never dealt with buyer agency or any of those things. And that's one of the things that really puzzles me about this suit and this national. It comes out of one state and their one form that was judged to be confusing, and now the new rules apply to everybody, whether or not we were doing it right in the first place.
Yeah, it can be confusing, and I think Virginia kind of had a lot on the ball to start with.
We do. We have a phenomenal state association of realtors. The leadership there, the legal team there is just awesome, and they keep us way ahead of the game.
So as buyers and sellers too, I guess, are contemplating, how do I choose an agent? What do I need to be asking them in this sit-down meeting or even in an interview ahead of time? How do they know if they're getting someone with the right certifications or the right training, or if they're getting someone who's just kind of laid back and lets the, when a market's this hot, can they kind of rest on their laurels a bit? Like, how should they be interviewing those agents?
Well, for buyers, that's a great question. I think for buyers, it's important to meet with those agents, but really to expect the agent to lead that discussion. The agent should be ready with some questions that will start to help them frame, what are our goals here? What are we really looking for? What kind of help are you looking for from me? If the agent, like you said, just kind of sits down and says, hey guys, how we doing? And they don't really have a game plan, that's a pretty big red flag. I would be looking for professionalism, experience. If they don't have experience, I wouldn't immediately write them off. If they don't have a lot of experience, ask them what their support system is. Do they have a mentor? Do they work regularly with their broker if they have questions? Those kind of things. Ask them about the market, what they see, what's happening with pricing, what's happening with financing. Do they have local connections with lenders and settlement agents? Can they get those type of questions answered before we start looking? Those kind of things. Part of it is chemistry. Do we hit it off? Do we want to work with each other? Are you comfortable taking my advice? And part of it is, is this a professional person that I'm going to be comfortable dealing with in this whopper of a transaction?
Yeah. And so one of the things we keep hearing about and talking about is low inventory, rising prices. Both of those have really kept the pendulum over on the seller's market side for a long time. Any thoughts on, does it swing back the other way anytime? And then what happens if it does?
Yeah. Well, in theory, it does. That's what they taught us in school, but it hasn't in a while. Really, on big picture nationwide, we've had a shortage of inventory since the Great Recession. Builders
Mhm.
just turned the faucet off after that because the market was flooded with foreclosures, and they couldn't sell a house for their cost.
Right.
And we've been behind ever since. So I think it's going to be a seller's market for quite a while. We're starting to see a few maybe hints that price increases could be flattening. We've got
Mhm.
considerably more, 75% more inventory in the central Shenandoah Valley than we did at this time last year. But that's not because of new listings, sadly. New listings have gone up, but marginally so. So that tells me that the market is actually absorbing homes at a slower pace, probably because interest rates bumped back up over 7%.
Right.
And so that, in theory, again, should cause prices to flatten a little bit. They're still going up depending on where you live in our area, anywhere between 4 and 9% a year. The 4 would be fine. That's a fairly healthy number.
Right.
At least we've come down out of double digits in most areas. But yeah, it's going to be a seller's market for a while.
You mentioned interest rates too, and one of the things you hear people say is, "Oh, date the rate and marry the house," right? So I guess what they mean is go ahead and buy the house you want now, and plan to refinance if and interest rates come back down. Does that sound like good advice?
A little of both, I think. I think the idea of buying the house you want now is a good idea because prices are going to continue to go up. We are going to be more buyers than sellers for the foreseeable future. However, I think giving folks the idea that rates are going to plunge back down to 3.5 or 3, and that they'll be able to, everybody will be safe and happy again, is not probably honest or likely. I think that was, if you look at the past 50 years or so, that was the only time rates were that low. So I don't think it's reasonable to expect they'll drop back down to that again.
Right. That's pretty unprecedented.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your wisdom and expertise on all this. And also want to take a moment just to acknowledge you for the volunteer work you do in our community, especially for kids.
Yeah.
You and your wife fostered 6 girls over the last 3 years.
We did.
You've been 9 years on the board at the Boys and Girls Club. You've been a big brother since 2010.
I have. That's a lot of fun.
Led the praise band at McGaheysville United Methodist Church, volunteered with the Shenandoah Valley Bicycle Coalition. Tell me a little bit about the Bicycle Coalition. That's not one I've heard of.
Great. I'm glad I could introduce you to the coalition. The coalition actually started way back when as 2 clubs. There was a mountain bike club and a road bike club, and they decided to blend together. There was a lot of overlap, and became the Shenandoah Valley Bicycle Coalition. And they've actually been a super effective lobbying force and getting a lot of the pedestrian and bike-friendly changes made in Harrisonburg. The part I'm involved with is trail building, and specifically at Massanutten. So I live at Massanutten. I get to play on that western slope anytime I want to. Membership in the coalition also gets you the right to use those trails for hiking, biking, walking, dog walking, whatever you like. So it's a super organization. All of the trails over there are volunteer built. Or funded by volunteer dollars, the few times we've been able to hire professionals. And it is as much, for me at least, it's as much fun as the riding. It's really neat to come together with a group of people and with just hand tools, carve a trail and move big rocks, and through teamwork and a lot of ingenuity. And luckily we've got some really, really experienced, skilled, knowledgeable trail builders in our area. So we start out with a good plan, and then a whole bunch of volunteers finish it out.
Wow, I'll have to come check that out sometime.
Yeah. COVID really blew up the western slope, and it went from being just bicycling mainly to a lot of trail running and hiking and dog walking and family picnics. Anything to get together outdoors. And so that's continued, and it's really been pretty neat to see.
Oh, cool. So anybody who follows or sees you on social media has seen you exploring various coffee spots all around town. And with so many new options available, do you have a favorite local coffee shop?
I have a couple, but I don't work at coffee shops. I'm of a generation that comes to the office. That's just what's
Right.
in my DNA. I love coffee, and I love to buy fresh coffee at all of our local coffee shops. But I'm the guy that takes it to go and doesn't sit down with the laptop. But it is a treat to have so much variety and good coffee shops around both Rockingham and Augusta. So I think in Rockingham, Front Porch is an awesome operation. They just moved to a new location at Court Square in Harrisonburg.
That's
And Crucible Coffee in Stanton is just delicious. Highly recommend them if you haven't been there.
So do you find folks asking you for advice about coffee or real estate more?
All the time. I get stopped in Target. Hey, coffee man. People at church ask me, what flavor would my wife like? It's become a running joke one time I made a big deal that to our video folks a couple weeks ago that somebody actually stopped me and asked me a real estate question. But it's almost always about coffee, and it happens all the time. It cracks me up. Yeah. And that was just supposed to be a little, sideline to these real estate.
Right.
Stuff. But it's like people fast forward through the real estate and just want to see what I'm drinking that week.
Right. Well, I watch the real estate part, I promise.
Okay. I appreciate that.
So not actually a sit around in a coffee shop kind of guy. What about local restaurants? After a busy day at work, do you have a favorite spot to unwind and grab a bite to eat?
I eat a lot of Asian food. I think we've got some great Asian choices, especially right around my office. Jayco Sushi, House of Noodles, Thai Cafe. But honestly, I mostly eat at home. I love to cook. That's kind of my unwinding time of the day. I'm pretty good at it after all these years, and I kind of prefer to do that rather than eat out most days.
Wow. And so other stuff you do for fun?
I play as much music as I can. I've been playing guitar since I was 10. Mountain biking, which has somewhat taken a backseat to motorcycling for me in the past few years. After a 30-year chat with Jenny, I finally got a thumbs up to buy a motorcycle, and that's been my infatuation for the last few years.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Definitely appreciate all you do for our community, both in the real estate world and in the volunteer world. If folks want to get in touch with you, if they have questions about real estate, what's the best way to find you?
Actually, easier than my name, which is my main email, questions@klinemay.com. Will come right to me.
Perfect.
Yep.
Perfect. Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you want to let folks know before we sign off?
No, I appreciate this and this series. And I mean, with regard to the settlement, I would say over and above everything else, don't believe the headlines. Sit down with a local realtor and talk with them about it.
That's solid advice. Thanks so much, Karl.
All right, Dale. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.